Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about what is called a process. What do you mean by a process? Okay. Any kind of work you do, or any kind of projects you do, or any kind of thought processing, it's all done by what is called a process. Okay. Process is the critical thing of any kind of work being done. Okay. When you have a process, then it requires some kind of time. Okay, a time dependent work is called a process. Okay, so uh, the different kinds of process. Okay, there's real time process and there is batch processing, and then have line queuing processing, and other kinds of process types. Okay, but basically there are just a particular process. Process means, when do you say that the process has got what is called a beginning and it has got what is called an end. Okay, so once a particular action is complete, then it is called a process or something to do with time. It's, so if we go into the definition of what does process mean, a series of actions or steps taken in order to achieve a particular end. Okay, so you are taking a series of action steps to taken to achieve a particular end. So what is the finally outcome you have? That is why it is called. So it's basically, if you're doing signal processing, it is going to take the input signal, do some kind of processing on it, and then finally get the output signal. So that is one process. Okay, that is one of the basic things of a process. It is going to do some kind of actions over it, and then finally you're going to give the end. So if we take signals, it's going to be signal processing. Okay, if you are going to take other kinds of things, there are other kinds of processing involved. Okay, so if you're thinking about signal processing is the basic component of any kind of process work. Okay, a processor does basically some kind of signal processing, and then finally it gives you the input, and then finally it takes in the input and gives you the output. That's all. Okay, so that is how the process is there. Okay, let's look at some of the things. Okay, what do you mean by process? Okay, advance advance in the process of time. Okay, okay, advance in the process, something going on, proceeding, a natural phenomenon marked by gradual changes that lead towards a particular result, the process of growth, a continuing natural or biological activity or function such the process as breathing. Okay, so when you are concentrating on anything, or whether you are doing any kind of data storage or any kind of information storage, whether you are doing in a relational database or hierarchical database, what you are actually doing, it is a kind of process. So process is the most critical thing of any kind of work being done. Okay, so why do you define all the functional objects, functions, data, and other kinds of things? Because you need to do a particular process. Okay, so for that you do objects. Okay, so you create objects, you delete objects, you do some kind of functional working on the objects to control the entire thing, and then finally you get the output. Okay, that is why the process is something to do with how to do a particular kind of work with different functionalities and other things, and then finally get the output. Okay, so any computer or anything, it is going to take some kind of input and it gives the output, and some kind of process it's going to be done, depends on how much of storage. So if you want to do it just data storage, okay, data storage is a kind of process. Okay, you're going to take something, store it in some information gathering kind of thing, then finally you come out with that. Once the information gathering is done in a proper manner, ordered and sequenced and other things, then you have, so there are different kinds of process which we'll do later. Okay, what is the process? An example, a definition of process is the action happening while something is happening or being done. An example of process, the steps taken by someone to clean a kitchen. An example of a process, the collection of action items is decided on by government commitments. Okay, uh, what is the other term for process? Okay, other term for process are synonyms, and other things are the rectify, refine, or something like that. Refinement is a kind of process. Okay, so if you take cooking, so what are the basic things you are going to do? You are going to collect all the utensils and other things, put it in proper place, make arrangements for the heating elements and other things, then finally put the thing on the stove and then heat the thing, and then finally you take the cooking material out, and then you present the whole thing in different kinds of utensils, and then finally you call up other people as a kind of thing, inviting and other things, and then finally what you do, you eat up the food and then clean the whole thing and complete the entire process. The whole process involves only the people eating a particular food. Okay, there are other kinds of things involved with the intermediary things. Okay, right from the start to the end. Okay, so these intermediary things are what is called the different kinds of layering. Okay, so the layering is a kind of thing. Already I told about BSD systems which have some kind of layering and metadata and other things. Okay, these metadata are useful to do some kind of process work. Okay, basically you're going to do some kind of process, and that process is helped by all these different kinds of metadata transformations which happen. So a process means a metadata transformation into a particular kind of work done, and finally they presented with the metadata, the output metadata. So basically input metadata and output metadata. Okay, so that is the kind of process. Okay, a process must do what it is supposed to do. Okay, it must be simple and make life better for all concerned. It must demonstrate, deliver value to the customers. It must satisfy and delight them in satisfying agreement that is made with them. Okay, what are the four types of process? So you have to know what are the different types of process. One is called a project process. Then you have jobbing process, batch process, line and continuous. Line and continuous basically queuing kind of things, queued and then finally given out the output process. That is a batch kind of thing which is done in bulk, and a huge kind of things which will be done in a huge kind of project. Is a kind, once you start a process of building a home, it's a kind of project. So right from the start it involves different kind of time frames and other things. Okay, that is called a batch project. Okay, project processing. Jobbing is a kind of particular kind of thing. Say you want to deliver a particular window or something like that, then it involves some kind of fixtures and other things. So that is called a jobbing process. Batch processing is like if you are taking a whole thing and then taking a delay time, and you want 10 50 number of stones or bricks or for the building the wall, then it is called batch processing. Then line and continuous is something like that, regularly going on to the particular thing. It's some kind of real time processing. Okay, so real time processing, line and continuous is called real time processing. Batch processing is something delayed kind of thing, a whole bulk kind of. Jobbing is something to do with immediate processing, which will do a particular kind of work or functionality involved. Project is the entirety of a particular kind of process. Okay, so process is so each one has got different definitions. Okay, so for a project there is a start of a project, planning of the project and other things. So for a project it's a planning and other kinds of implementations to end the project. Okay, so there is a beginning and end to a particular project. Jobbing is a kind of also a beginning and end to a project, but it is not a complete project kind of thing, but it is a short kind of functionality. Okay, batch is also, it's a short kind of functionality, but it is done as a kind of different time frames. Small things are done one at time t, and then the next time t is some kind of separation of the time process, and then that is called a batch process. Line and continuous is a complete kind of real time analytics. Okay, that is why. So the process, when you understand the process, you have to know the different types of process. Okay, involved. Okay, the finally anyway there is a beginning and end to it, and that is why it is called a process. Some kind of work being done at the end of the time within the particular time frame, or other factors come in like cost and other things are all different, planning and other things are all different, but a process is basically involves these things. Okay, how you do a planning of the process and other things will be done later. what so basically anything kind of work being done is done through a process. That is why you have a processor on a computer. Okay, it is going to do the process for you to get the output results. Okay, so you set up inputs, then you give it batch processing, then finally you get the output. Say you want to print a bill or something like that, so you're giving it to the printer and finally you're getting the printout on the other side, then it is called up when the process is complete. Okay, that is done by the machine. Okay, that is done by the machine called the computers. The computer has got what is called a processor inside. Okay, that is the hardware kind of thing which is going to help you doing the kind of work you are going to. When you think of objects as functionality, then I think they are the control management work of a particular process. Okay, so why you define objects, why you define all these functional things and other things, it is a kind of specific kind of route taken to achieve a particular goal. Okay, it can be fast. Usually the processes are decided by how amount of GPUs, the power it has. Power it is how short it can do the project. Okay, big computer system, they do it extremely fast. So they have higher processing power or higher GPU. It is called a the amount of power it has. GPU is the measure kind of number of flops, number of flips and flops. Those kind of all measure of how much fast the things can be done, how much slow the things can be done, how much amount of batch processing you can do. Those kind of all different. Okay, so process basically is the key element of doing anything. Okay, whether it's constructing a building, constructing a bridge, constructing a thing, or cooking food, or presenting it to some people, or things like that. Okay, the basic things of a process involves different kinds of things. Okay, I have told you about the network, which has got basic things involved in a particular kind of environment. For a network layering, you have what is called, for any kind of network layering, you have what is called a physical layer, then you have a data link layer, then you have a network layer, then you have a session layer, then you have a presentation layer, then you have an application layer. So these are the 7 layers of process modeling. Okay, a process is modeled based on these 7 layering. What are the 7 layering? Physical, data link, network, transport, session, presentation and application. Okay, physical, data link, network, transport, session, presentation and application. Okay, so we'll consider each one of those things as a kind of like, say for cooking you need all the different kinds of utensils and that is called a hardware kind of process that is required. Okay, hardware process that is quite a kind of required. Okay, data link layer is something to do with the actual kind of thing where you put in rice and you cook all the things. That is called a data link layer. Network layer is how you uh, call up people for kind of thing, networking kind of thing, and kind of like collect all these elements from different areas and locations and those kind of things. That is network layer things. Okay, then after the transport layer, you have to actually take the food, present it to some place, put it on the table, and those kind of things are done by transport layer. Session layer is going to be as a kind of agreement between where to place what kind of things has to be done and what kind. So mostly when you think of session layer, it is a management work. Okay, so all managers work only in session layer, that you have to understand. Okay, so mostly when managers are involved in any kind of projects, they work on the session layer. So session layer is very critical in kind of management work. Okay, they do the planning, they do the process management, they do all the kinds of different kinds of things work for you. Okay, after session layer you have uh, uh, layer, you have what is called a presentation layer and application layer. Presentation layer is finally how we put things on the table and show the things as a kind of final what is happening and the presentation of the food, and finally eating is what is called an application. So you calling up people, those kind of things are all done by management work. So session layer is something to do with management kind of work. Okay, so physical layer is the lowest level of job processing, and so the process involves different kinds of, so each layer has got different kinds of entities associated with it. So management work kind of work is done by session. So moving kind of things and transport kind of things is done by transport layer. Okay, data link layer is going to do all the different kinds of arrangement of the things, putting in proper place, those kind of things are going to be done in data link layer. Okay, physical layer is going to do the actual processing, that is heating up elements, cooking and those kind of things are all done by data link elements. Okay, physical layer elements. Okay, so any kind of process involves these 7 layer of modeling. Okay, any process or any kind of job or any kind of project or any kind of process involves these 7 layer of modeling. Without these 7 layer of modeling, you cannot do any kind of process. The process needs a particular planning. So if you want to take a project, then it needs some kind of plan. So planning work is done by what? Session layer. So it will do all the planning work. So if you want to get something from the Google, you Google and get something. Okay, so get some kind of information that is done by the session layer. First, the session layer is activated as a kind of management part to find out where the things are and things like that. Okay, so that is the first layer. Session layer is the one which is going to be used doing the manager kind of work. The presentation and application layer are going to finally present the whole things as a kind of what kind of form it wants. Okay, so what kind of graphics and all these things are involved in what is called the presentation layer. Different kinds of graphics, different kinds of sound variations and other things are all uh, dependent on what kind of that involves in presentation layer. So if you have YouTube, you click on the YouTube and finally the YouTube presents the whole thing as a kind of video. Then that presentation is called how it has to be presented, whether it has to be put in a proper order and then sequentially given, and finally so that is the presentation layer kind of management. Below that it is called the management kind of. So all managers are involved in session layer management. Session layer is the one which does all the planning work. It does all the kind of management, what has to be done, when, how which way, and all the things are decided on the session layer. So session layer is very critical in any kind of management part or process management. Any kind of process management is done by session layer protocols. Okay, they are called session layer protocols. Okay, so that is the basic thing you have to understand about a process. A process is the basic thing of doing some work in specified amount of time. That is why it is called a process. Process involves what is called a time, planning and other things. Okay, what is an effective process? Process effective. In order to effective, a process must deliver desired output while fulfilling the needs of customers in a satisfactory way. So you have to fulfill the customer in a satisfactory way, then it is called a satisfactory, then it is called with an output. So it is taking an input and then delivering desired output. It is called a process parameter. So you define all the functions, and so .exe file in a computer is basically a process file. Okay, it is a process file. So you take that process file and it gives all the instructions to do the particular kind of process, and that is why we run on the hardware and you do all the processing for the thing. And finally, once the process file is complete, .exe file is actually executable or a process file. So you think of process as a process file rather than other kinds of files are there. Even a data can be a process file, or it can be a some kind of database also is a kind of process file, like hierarchical database, relational database is also a process file. Sometimes you have to do a presentation of the whole thing. Video files are also sometimes called a process file because you have done some kind of processing over it and presenting it. So process means basically you are going to do some kind of work within a specified amount of time. So the work done on or something to do with, if you take as a physical kind of thing, it is power. Okay, equivalent in physics is called a power kind of thing. What do you improve in improve a process? How do you improve a process? Select a process to improve. Assign responsibility for the change effort. Write down your current steps within that process. Identify bottlenecks, roadblocks, and issues. Find ways to resolve the issues. Test your new process. So the process involves different kinds of environmental thing. I already physical layer bottlenecks. Then you have data link layer bottlenecks. Then you have data network layer bottlenecks. Then you have session layer bottlenecks, transport layer bottlenecks. These things, all these issues, if they are resolved and finally process is given, then that is done by what is called a session layer. The session layer does all the managerial work of how to make the process run and what kind of optimal routing and other things, transport, how to do the transport, all this done is done by the session layer protocol. Session layer protocol is the very critical in any kind of management work, and doing the planning and all those planning and other things are done usually by the session layer protocol, and presentation is the way it has to be given to the customer, or kind of particular guy or something like that, okay, or how it has to be presented, whether it has to be graphical or whether it has to be straightforward, or how fast it has to be, though how short should be the project, and how fast should be the project, or how much of batch processing should be done. Those are all decisions about session layer management. Okay, so session layer is a kind of management kind of work. Then after that, you have the lower level things which are doing specific kind of transport layer, do only transport, okay, of particular goods. Routing and other things are all how it has to be routed, those things are all taken care of transport layer. Okay, so physical layer is the one which is going to do all the kind of actual processing, or the kind of managing the kind of process. Every process has to be managed and kind of thing. So each layer has got different kind of particular kind of work in process involvement in a particular kind of environment. Okay, so, how to improve your work? 7 steps to improve processes. Okay, there are basically 7 steps to improve your processes. Select a process to improve. Assign responsibility for the change. Write down your current steps within that process. Identify bottlenecks, roadblocks, and issues. Find ways to resolve the issues. Test your new process. This is the kind of thing. How do you develop a process? Okay, how do you develop a process? You have to create a process and end the process. That is called a developing a process. Identify what is the process mean. Process means what kind of functionality it has to govern, those kind of things, and planning and other things. Those are called the identifying the process. Outline the scope of the process. Okay, how much scope of the process, how much it has to be done, how much far it has to be done, how much time it will take, those kind of things. The scope of the process. Identify process inputs. What are the things that is going to come in? What are the things that is going to go out? So you identify process inputs and outputs. Research process needs. Okay, for a particular process, what are the things needed? Like what kind of data structures you need, what kind of objects you need, how do you define all those and put it in a byte format and a process file. That is called a research process needs. Okay, then consider the stages in the processes. So there are 7 stages I already told you about for a particular need. Okay, the physical layer process, the data link layer process, the network layer process, the session layer process, presentation layer, application layer process. Okay, identify the process operatives. Operatives, what are the metadata that are involved in the kind of each layer. Okay, for the process involvement. Okay, for a particular process, what are the metadata that is required and how to manage the whole thing. The management work is done by the session layer. So session layer metadata is usually something to do with planning the process and other things. Okay, for a particular process. Okay, order your process. Order the sequence the whole thing in a proper manner so that you can get the process done. Okay, there are T types of process. Okay, operational process, supporting processes, management process. So when you are looking at management process, there's a session layer which is going to do the management process. Supporting process are done by all the lower level kind of thing. Operation process is also how it has to be done. Those kind of things are all operational process. The process means 3 different kinds of layering for that. Okay, management process, supporting process, operational process. Operational process is supporting process of the lower level management of the thing. Presentation is done by supporting process, and operational process is going to be the processes and different kinds of things. Management process is going to be the session layer kind of things. What are the main types of processes? Okay, structured process, case type process, research process, engineering process, artistic process. So different types of projects for processes are there. Okay, finally you're getting some kind of input and output, and you're going to process the whole thing. The final presentation This is structured process is a kind of thing which you have structural definitions and other things. Those kind of things are called structured process. Okay. Case type process is individual, semi-structured, loosely structured. Okay, semi-structured is just part process. That is called a case type process. Research process is a kind of finding out new things and other things. Those kind of called research process. An engineering process is a kind of another thing. An artistic process is the way it is presented and things like those things are all artistic. What is the process? What is process strategy? Okay, documentation and establishment of the process that an organization puts in place to achieve its goal. Okay, if we have a complete documentation for a particular process and other things, then that is called what is called a puts in place to achieve its goals to particular process getting done. So the goals getting done, then that is called a process strategy. Okay, that is called a planning or a process strategy. Planning is after first thing you have to give the process strategy, then after that you have to do what is called a planning of the whole process. So there, for time involvement kind of thing, it is called a process planning. Okay, for a structural involvement, it is called a process strategy. Okay, so when you are defining all the structural implementations of how you are going to do a particular thing, project or something like that, then to achieve a particular goal, that is called a process strategy. When you're doing how it is going to be, how fast it's going to be done, time involvement and other things, that is going to be process planning. So the process planning and the process strategy. Okay, what are the two types of processes? Okay, what are the two types of, sorry, independent process, cooperative process. Okay, independent process, something like individual things where you can just like you can do a parallel processing. That kind of things are called independent processing. And cooperative processing is the serial processing. Okay, serial processing is a cooperative processing, and independent process is a kind of parallel processing where you can just give parallelly do certain things at the time is parallelize on things like that. That is called an independent process. And cooperative process is going to cluster some of the process. That is why it is called cooperative process. What is system process? System process, okay, essentially indistinguishable from any user written program. So if you are not writing any kind of user written program, then system process is essentially indistinguishable from any user written program. So if you write a program, it is indistinguishable. So that is called a system process, or they are the same public API, application specific integrated circuits, or application specific program. Okay, kernel services available to any suitably privileged user process. It is the architecture that gives QNX neutrino unparalleled extensibility. What is process life cycle? Okay, when you think of a process, like a process involves a different kinds of life cycle, the stages that a physical process or a management model goes through as it proceeds from birth to death. So starting from beginning to end, what are the different kinds of things it goes through? That is, it is called the project process life cycle. So right from the beginning, what are the different steps taken to achieve the final goal, the different types of process. Okay, that is called the process life cycle. So the definition of all the different kinds of data structures, the objects and other things, what are the things involved, and how finally it comes to the output. Then the stages, different kinds of stages. That stage thing is called what is called a process life cycle. The entirety of the process is defined by a set of stages, and each stage has got different time frames and other things. Those kind of things are there. Okay, so what is ready state of process? What is the beginning is called the ready state of process. The process which are ready for execution and resides in the main memory. So when it has the main memory and is going to execute the whole thing, then it is called the state of process. Is the ready state of process. Ready state of beginning of the whole thing. Okay. So similarly, there are other kinds of process stages, different stages of a process. What is the minimal process? What is the end stage of end state of a process, and things like that. So usually the .exe files is supposedly, so that is called a process files or process tables. Okay, process table contains all the information about the .exe files which is going to be done executed one by one. Okay, every process is going to be run on a particular kind of system, and this process is the basic thing of any kind of process management, process involvement, process time frame, process functionality are all involved. Process structuralization and other things are all different kinds of things of a particular process. What is core process? Core process is something to do with the main process of a particular process involvement. So that is called the core process. There are different kinds of things, functional processes and other things. Okay, you can go into different kinds of things, but basically the metadata I already told you is basically do involves the kind of process management. If you do a process extremely fast, it is going to take the 7 layers. Okay, 7 layers of process involvement, and each layer of process involvement has different kinds of functionality associated with it. Okay, a physical data has got specific kind of functionality, data link has got specific kind of, and you have to define all the metadata for this, and optimizing all the 7 layers of metadata to do a particular function or a process management, the complete up to the levels of application and up to the levels of presentation is called what is called a process management or a process development and things like that. Okay, so there are other things which you can go and look into for further studies, but right now I don't want to go into the entirety of what is the visible part of what is the visible process, what is the invisible process, what is not a state. So each process has got what is called a state. Okay, there's a state and a transition. State and a transition is involved in a particular kind of, so any kind of process, whether it is the 7 layers or each one has got a specific kind of process association with each one of those layers. Okay, the entire project process goes to the entire 7 layers, but a specific process or for transport has a specific kind of process that is going on, and it does what is called a state change. Okay, the set of states that is defined, and you make a state change from one node to another node, then that is called a process involved. So first thing, you have to define all the process kind of process table or what is called a graph for a particular process. That is what are the different kinds of stages. Okay, state transitions, and what is the input kind of state transition, what is the beginning of a state transition, what is the end of a state transition. So you cluster the whole process network process network, and then finally give the output. That is called a so you have to do a process analytics for that entire process. That is called given by what is called a state transition table. So state transition table always involves a particular kind of process. Okay, for further reading on what is a state change, what is a state functionality and other things, you can go look up what is a state change, what is a process involvement for a particular state change machine. Okay, states. So first you have to draw all the different stages, and then you have to link all the stages with particular kind of time frame on what are the different kinds of state changes will happen in a kind of particular process. What is the beginning of a state change, what is the end of a state change, and finally what you get the output. So in beginning of input, output is coming out in the process table. Process graph is the one which is going to be used. That is called a process graph or something like that. Okay, so state transition table is nothing but a process graph. Okay, which will give you the complete analytics of a particular process beginning to end. Okay, how much time frame and all these things, how the state transits from one state to another state. Okay, that is called a state transition table or process graph or process other things. Okay, so to analyze a particular thing, so you have to make the state transition table, and then finally you have to analyze the whole thing and reduce the state transition to a particular thing. That is called analyzing a process. So if you want to analyze the process, how much things you can do parallelism, how much things you can do manager work, how much thing you can do on planning, those kind of all analytics of a state transition table for a particular kind of process. Okay, those things are not quite critical in doing any kind of management work. So the management work, the session layer will take care of all this different kinds of managerial work, how to optimize the particular state and other things are all done by session layer management. Okay, So how to present it, how to what is the final application for a particular things, how to call an application, those kind of things are done by higher layers. And so you have, when you think of management work, immediately you have to go into session layer. Okay, session layer is very critical in any kind of work. Okay, and below that are called process tables. You can use using process tables and other things and make a state. Process table is another word for state transition tables. Okay, state transition table is similar to what is called a process table. Okay, basic thing, criticality is something to do with process. Okay, and how do we can use the process to do interrupt vectors. You can do queuing for batch processing. You use what is called a queuing. For a immediate process, you do what is called a interrupt vectoring. And if you want to queue, manage a particular kind of process, that kind of managerial work has to be decided. What kind of interrupts you have to define, what kind of queuing you have to use, those kind are all decided by the session layer protocols to do a particular process, and how to present it, and finally how to write an application, or what kind of applications or what kind of executables has to be used. Application is finally, it is an executable file. Okay, the finally, when you have an application, when you say application, it is an executable file which is going to do specific kind of process, and finally give you the output of a process in a presentable manner. Finally, that is called an application, or a exe file is called an API file, or it can be called an API file in case of other things like Google and other things. They are called API files and other things. Okay, so that is all for today about process life cycle and other things. Okay, so that must be enough for today's lecture about process.